I live in a small town. If you blink, you'll miss it. The best we can boast about is a single stop sign and a gas station, which we only have because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is 25 minutes away, so when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal, they're often drifting through. Drug addicts run rampant and will steal everything they can from your house, but it's the normal out here. However, what happened a few years ago certainly was not normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room, but it was summertime and not much I could do. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so that I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. Next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a shitty set of blinds. Part of the blinds were broken from wear and tear, and the crappy AC output would make them move back and forth, so you get a glimpse of outside every so often. The yard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline at my window. The figure of someone was directly at my window, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. The sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head and slept in a cloth oven that night. By the morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mom's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what happened. She laughed at me like I was an idiot and told me it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I almost believed her since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something didn't sit right. Later that day, when we were doing yard work, I glanced over at my window and saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed it out to my mom, who proceeded to chew me out. "Well, that's how the cat probably got up there, moron. Stop leaving furniture everywhere." But I hadn't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it. So we moved it back, and so began a pattern. At night, I'd see the figure, complain to my mom, and we'd find the chair moved back every single morning. This went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until one morning, we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember her shaking her head and complaining about those damn stray cats that we had still yet to see. I could tell she was unnerved by that development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in the living room that night. The only problem was our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there was always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until after about a few days later that we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I'd woken up until it happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost like someone was shining a flashlight in. I saw it trace along the walls and land on the love seat across from the couch I was on. I was mortified. When I told my mom, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window. He slept in a recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside the window anyways. It seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of fear and watched through the window across from my bed. I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he'd been here plenty of times before. I still remember the large build the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived there, and wasn't creeping around my yard in the dead of night. I just remembered listening to the TV until I fell asleep again. My dad would have been pissed if I woke him up. He was grumpy on a good day and terrifying on a bad day. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof because I was scared. The next morning, my mom yelled at me again for the patio furniture, but this time something new happened. She demanded I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlights, etc. It wasn't me. I begged with my mom and pleaded with her, just stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my ass beat for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad. Finally, she agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mom did, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked into our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was a sound of someone placing metal tools down on the brick steps, as if they were trying to be quiet but couldn't fully muffle it. My mom whispered for me to go wake up my dad. My dad was angry, having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out from the back door, towards the front of the house where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming and someone dropping tools, then the shot of a gun twice. The frantic footsteps pounding out of the garage felt like they were coming from my chest. My mom peeked out the window, then opened the door, and my dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but told us there was a man crouching at our front door, looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning, the police from the closest town arrived. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, for a description of the man, and told us to install cameras. That was it. They said the guy was probably just looking for something else to steal for quick money. If that had been the case, why hadn't he stole the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles just sitting in the garage? We finally set up hunting trail cameras around the house, but nothing had happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about the incident years later when I sleep in my own bed. I don't know what he was looking for, or why he did the things that he did. Whatever the case may be, man at the window, let's not meet. When I was around 6, my parents divorced and my dad was soon given full custody, as my mom is an alcoholic and had racked up a few DUIs and such. Anyways, me, my younger sister, and my dad moved to a new neighborhood and we transferred to the nearby elementary school. The school is pretty close to my house, maybe 5 or 7 blocks away. Close enough to walk, but my sister and I were too young to walk alone. Sometimes our dad would walk us to school in the morning and then walk back, and less commonly he'd walk to pick us up. Most of the time he picked us up in his black Mazda. The way pickups worked at my school was pretty common. We went out with our class, stood by our teacher and classmates, and when a car pulled up, designated staff members would ask who the student was that they were trying to pick up, and then go find them with their class and escort them to their car. Seeing as my mom was in jail at this time, the only person who ever picked us up was my dad. One day I was in 3rd grade and my sister was in 1st. We were outside waiting to be picked up. After being outside for only a few minutes, my little sister came over to me and said someone who wasn't dad was in a car to pick us up. He said both of our names and they'd found her first. She said he'd smile at her and he told her our dad had told him to pick us up that afternoon. But she said she wanted to find me first before she got in the car since she didn't recognize him. Thank God she did that. Our dad had always told us not to talk to strangers, so I grabbed my teacher and told her what happened. She got a really alarmed look on her face and told us to stay where we were. Our dad arrived to pick us up a few minutes later, and we got home safely. We told him about it, and we all had a long talk about safety protocol. He asked my sister to describe the man and the car, and he called the police and gave them the best description he could, although my sister was very young and wasn't very focused on important details like that. A few weeks later it happened again, but this time he said my name. My dad had given the school the same info he'd given the police, but presumably he had multiple vehicles because my sister said he'd been in a red car, and this one was black, similar to my dad's. I saw the black car and ran up to it, but luckily I caught a glimpse of the face before I opened the door and hopped in. He was middle-aged, really pale, with a really angular face. We made eye contact and his mouth was smiling, but his eyes looked really wrong at me, squinty and almost angry. I turned back towards the carpool assistant who delivered me to the car to alert her, but by the time I did, the car was gone, and I couldn't give many details. My dad contacted the police again, but without a license plate, they weren't really able to do much. The last time I saw him wasn't until months later, near the end of the school year. I was walking home with a big group of kids that lived in my neighborhood, and he drove by us and slowed the car down to try to talk to us. I recognized his face immediately and alerted the other kids to run. Luckily, we were only about 3 houses down from where one of my friends lived, and we all piled into her house, concerning her parents significantly as we explained the situation. I never saw him after that. My dad started dating my now stepmom, and we moved to her neighborhood and switched schools shortly after. I still think about him occasionally though. His face was actually in my dream a few nights ago, which reminded me to write about this experience. To this day, which I'm now in my 20s, I don't know how he knew our names, how he knew anything about us really. It's very scary to think about what would have happened to my tiny little sister if she'd gotten in the car with that man, and what might have happened to me if I had. To my childhood predator, please, let's not meet. I think there was someone living in my shed. The title says it all, but it also doesn't say anything. Lately I've been noticing something off about home, like there's something else there with me, my wife, and our 2 dogs, but I haven't been able to put my finger on it until today. For some context, I live in a duplex. We share the property with another guy in his mid-20s. He has his own house and we have ours, but we share the laundry room that leads to our respective backyards that are separated by a fence. This all started around 2 months ago when the guy sent me a text. "Hey man, just a heads up, someone stole my bike out of the sunroom. This is extra creepy because to get to our sunroom/laundry room, you would need to hop the brick fence surrounded by shrubby trees and then hurl the bike over. Unless the thief had the most massive pair of balls ever and walked it through one of our front doors when we weren't home. Either way, I didn't feel right and made more of an effort to keep the door locked. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago and I let my dogs into the backyard and one of them starts sniffing at the shed. No big deal, the lizards are coming out with it heating up. They probably just chased one under the door. I finally got them to come in and didn't give it much thought. I hardly ever go into that shed. Nothing wrong with it, it's just kind of out of the way, and I'm not really a hang out in the shed type of guy. So we generally use it for storage. Suitcases, furniture that doesn't fit/match the house, boring suburban shit. We probably enter it maybe 3 times a year. After the 18th day in a row of my dogs being curious about the shed, I decided to have a little look-see to see if maybe there was a Komodo dragon or something in there, since they wouldn't let this thing go. Nope, no Komodo. But what I did find literally made me piss myself just a little bit. Inside the shed was the bike that my neighbor had stolen a little while back. My first thought was, oh shit, my wife is a klepto. But I quickly ruled that out. She doesn't even like to bike. Then I was briefly worried that maybe my neighbor thought that I was the thief. I mean, it's in my shed. I don't know how to explain that if he did find it. Plus, I wanted to give him his bike back. I kept looking around and found one of our sleeping bags unraveled, but balled up behind a box. Inside of it was a sack of what looked like to be around $20 in change and singles. There was also a bag of garbage, and it had lots of food wrappers inside. Eventually, my brain accepted what it was ultimately denying at first, and put 2 and 2 together. Someone, I don't know who, is living in my shed, or at least was. Maybe the dogs spooked him off, or maybe they sleep there every night and leave during the day. If they weren't coming back, why would they leave the change? I left everything how I found it, and thought about what I should do next. Whoever did it must have gotten through with the spare set of keys I keep hidden in my backyard. I locked up and brought them inside with me tonight. Hopefully whoever it is gets the message and moves on.